So I don't know if this is an Eastern Coast thing, for Americans of course, but in my little town there is a twice the ice station. Basically, you can fill up water jugs in 5 gallons and get ice bags for cheaper than you could at the grocery store. I went out a few nights ago to get some water, because honestly, who wants to be drinking tap water anyway? My husband was at home, and because I'm kind of heavily pregnant at the moment, he insisted that he go instead. I wish that he would've. It was about 1 a.m. around this time, dark for miles around, and smack dab in the middle of nowhere. As I got out of my car, I opened the back seat to get the gallon jugs and closed the door. As soon as I did this though, a dark blue truck turned van pulled up perpendicular behind me. Presumably so I couldn't get out if I decided to get back in my car. Immediately, alarm bells started going off. Those bells started screaming at me when the slide door opened suddenly and 2 very large men jumped out. There was about a 20-foot distance between them and me, so I did the very first thing I could think of. I pulled out my phone. I answered a phone call from my husband. "Hey honey, yeah, I'm almost home." As soon as they saw me answer the phone, one of the guys shouted out, "Shit, damn it!" They both got back in the car and peeled out of the lot, tires squealing and all. I threw my unfilled jugs back into my car and locked all the doors 1,000,000 times or more. I broke down and called my husband for real this time. He told me to do my best to write down the make and model of the car, the color, and then we'd go to the police station in the morning. About 2 days later, there was breaking news of a pregnant woman that had just gone missing. She was abducted, and her father swore up and down that she wouldn't just leave. I know it was those men in the blue van. I told the police everything I know. I don't know if they targeted me because I was a woman all alone in the middle of nowhere. But deep down, I think they targeted me because I was pregnant. I don't want to think about what would have happened to me or my baby. I've had a couple of strange encounters while out camping, but this one definitely unsettled me the most of all. I was about 30 years old at this time. My girlfriend and I had decided to go camping for a couple of nights in a spot she knew of that was just south of Squamish, BC. It wasn't any sort of official campground or anything like that, but it was a spot that you pulled over and parked by the side of the highway to get into. We did that and then trekked with our gear into the woods that were between the highway and Howe Sound, which is the waterway that Squamish is at the northern end of. I should also mention that this was about a decade before any of the highway improvements that were made for the Olympics. After about 20 minutes of walking along an easy, well-used trail, we got to this area where there were a few old foundations from abandoned houses and buildings, including at least one with an intact set of concrete stairs. This spot also opened up onto a very nice beach on the ocean and had an open space to set up the tent beside the trail we had been walking along. Within half an hour, our tent was set up, the fire was prepared, and I had chopped enough wood for that entire night. I decided to go have a look at how much further the trail went. My girlfriend took her journal down to the beach to write a bit. I wasn't gone for very long at all, as within just a few hundred yards the trail came to an abrupt end at the base of a cliff. It was maybe 40 to 50 feet high and ran out into the water in one direction, then out of eyeshot in the other. I did try to follow it inland, but the forest became quite dense very quickly, so I had to stop within 30 minutes of exploring. I headed back over to our camp and headed down to the beach. My girlfriend and I spent the rest of the afternoon there, and around 6 p.m. went back to our site. I started up the fire, we cooked some dinner and had some wine together. So far, this was shaping up to be a very nice little getaway. After tidying everything up and letting the fire die down a bit, we got ready for bed and slipped into the tent to go to sleep. For whatever reason though, I decided to grab the axe from the stump that I had used to split the firewood earlier and brought it into the tent with me. Normally, this was not something I would do when camping. I thought perhaps it was because of the unofficial nature of this campsite. As is usually the case when camping, I fell asleep almost immediately. The exercise and fresh air do it for me every time. While I was asleep, a storm system seemed to have rolled in, and it started to rain very heavily. Being the good Cub Scout I was, I had taken the time to spread a tarp out over our tent, so fortunately none of the rain was actually impacting the tent itself. Much was being blocked by the wind as well. We were nice and snug inside, but that storm was making some real loud sounds, which of course made it very hard to go back to sleep. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I had just managed to fall into a light sleep when I heard what sounded like footsteps coming down the trail. By this time of night, the storm had mostly passed by, and the only other sound was very light rain smacking against the tarp. I sat halfway up. Through the tent material, I could see a light slowly coming down the trail, matching those footsteps. That got my attention real quickly. Who the fuck was out here in the middle of the night walking along this trail that was well off the beaten path and ended about a football field past where we were? Suddenly, the light and the footsteps stopped moving, and the light went out. What the fuck? It's one thing to be out here walking alone in the middle of the night, but why would you feel the need to extinguish your torch as well? The footsteps resumed coming towards us, but now at a much slower speed and much softer as well, like they were trying to sneak along without us noticing. I reached over and my hand grasped the axe firmly. I took the cover off and softly nudged my girlfriend. Don't say anything, but someone is approaching the campsite on the trail. She gave me a quizzical look. I shrugged my shoulders and nodded in the direction the person was coming from. Almost immediately, she picked up on the sound of footsteps, which were much closer and slower now. We looked at each other with freaked out expressions. I showed her my axe and she looked a bit relieved, though I was not any sort of axe master or anything like that. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, very close to the tent. For about 5 or 10 minutes, there was no movement from outside, although we could hear whoever it was breathing heavily. Finally, I called out, "Hey, whoever's out there, do you need some help or something?" Once I said that, the flashlight turned back on and shone through our tent a few times, around our campsite a few more. Abruptly, the person began to walk down the trail again in the direction of that huge cliff. Very quickly, they were out of sight down the trail. I took that opportunity to get my jeans and boots on in case there was some sort of further weirdness when they came back. There was, after all, nowhere for them to go once they reached that cliff. After about 20 minutes of waiting, they still hadn't returned yet. I got out of the tent and started up a fire. My girlfriend got dressed and came out to join me. After about another 20 or 30 minutes, we made some coffee and sat there keeping warm by the fire. We sat there together until the sun finally came up. No one ever came back down that trail. Once it was fully bright out, I took the axe and made my way along the path until I got there. That cliff was still there, just as impassable as I remembered it, with thick forest to one side and the ocean on the other. Not a single sign of last night's visitor to be seen. I slowly made my way back to the campsite, looking carefully to each side to see if there were any side trails I had missed. But no. We packed up and left immediately. To this day, I have no idea who this person was, where they even came from, or how they just mysteriously disappeared. Needless to say though, I never went back to camp there ever again. A few years ago, my husband and I were heading south to Texas for the winter on Halloween in our motorhome. We stopped briefly for a potty break at the first rest stop, over the border into Missouri. The rest area was quite huge, but there were not many vehicles there at this time. We parked in the area where trucks and RVs park. I did notice 2 cars backed in on the other side. I thought it was quite strange that they were both backed in like that. My husband stayed behind to rearrange some things in the storage bay. As I walked to the restroom, I heard 2 pops. I thought they sounded a lot like gunshots. I walked toward the sound. I heard another pop and saw something black fall to the parking lot. At first, I thought to myself, this is Halloween. Is this somebody's sick idea of a joke or something? Was it perhaps a wild dog? A man then looked my way, and I ducked behind an electrical box immediately. When I peeked out, the man casually walked to his car and slowly left, getting back onto the expressway. I walked over to where the man had just been to see what was there on the pavement, only to realize it was a woman's body. She was lying face down. I can still visualize her black jacket, shorts, and sandals on her feet, but mostly her long black hair blowing lifelessly in the wind. Immediately, I turned around and ran towards my husband, screaming, "Call 911! Someone's been shot!" We had no idea the address of where we were, but within just 10 minutes, there were around 15 police cars and EMS screeching their way in. We were held there for 5 hours in the rain, giving statements and eyewitness accounts. Needless to say, by the time we got to our intended campsite, I was a shaking, messed up basket case. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that woman fall to the ground and begin bleeding, and that man looking in my way. I was sure he was going to hunt me down and kill me, since I had just seen him murder someone. About 9 months later, they found him in Texas. He was found guilty of murder and is currently in jail. At least, I hope so. The woman was homeless and living in her car. The man killed her because he asked her for money, and she used a racial slur at him, apparently. Her family at the court meeting also said she was paranoid someone was going to kill her, and that's why she drove around in her car all the time. This was very scary to me, and I still relive the memory sometimes. This is a memory that I've always remembered vividly and still frightens me to this day. So, when I was around 9 years old or so, and my brother was 8, we had an experience that's very hard to explain, and quite frankly, very terrifying. It started while we were laying in bed. Now, we didn't sleep together, but we did have rooms just across from each other, with a bathroom and hallway separating us. Our house was a one-story. Both my brother and I had rooms that had a window that led out to 2 separate porches, a front porch and a back porch. My window was located in the front, and my brother's was located in the back. Clearly an ideal setup for any intruder that wanted easy access to a middle-class family. I mean, back then, my brother and I were pretty expendable, I guess, so yeah. Anyway, we were there in bed and talking across the hall from each other whilst in bed. We had to lean out from our beds to see each other while we talked. From my view, I could see him and the window that led to the back porch. The window had its blinds down, so I couldn't see anything that was outside of it, if there was anything. We were talking, and very swiftly an hour passed by. We were both getting pretty tired, so we said goodnight and tried to settle in for the night. I was just starting to drift off to sleep when I heard it, a whistle. Not just one, but a few, and not like standard whistling either. Rather, it was like someone was singing along to a tune. The only way I can describe its manner was sing-song. It sounded like the whistling was coming from my brother's room, so I assumed it must be him. But why would he be whistling like some barber from the 50s? It was so strange and creepy sounding. I leaned out of bed to tell my brother to shut up and stop doing that. But instead, I saw my brother staring back at me with a terrified look on his face. "Was that you?" "No, I thought that was you." The hair on the back of my neck stood up and was immediately at attention. I was pretty scared at this point, but I still needed to figure out what was going on. I got out of bed and rushed to my brother's bedroom. I jumped into his bed and we stared at the window, waiting to meet our maker. We waited for a good 10 minutes or so for anything, and nothing came. We were starting to doubt we'd even heard it in the first place when the whistling began again. The same tune, same cadence, same song, but this time it was longer and much more pronounced. Who the hell was out here casually whistling around our house at 11 at night? My brother and I didn't know what to do. We clutched each other as we heard what we thought might be a mass murderer outside my brother's window or something. Then it stopped, just as abruptly as it started. Boom! There was a huge crash on the back porch that sent us into a massive panic. I scrambled out of my brother's bed and sprinted to my parents' room. My brother and I woke them out of their slumber to warn them of this person terrorizing us on the back porch. Thankfully, they took us very seriously and climbed out of bed immediately. They walked to the back door as we followed. When they opened the door, there was a big hush that fell over everything. The only sound that could be heard was crickets chirping in the dark. However, the porch was lit up from the motion sensor floodlights on the corner of the house, just nearest to my brother's window. I don't know whether there was someone outside my brother's window or not, but the whistling I heard that night was the single most frightening thing I've ever heard. It's never happened again at my house either, but it's haunted both me and my brother for years. When I was in my early 20s, I lived in an apartment with my mom, brother, and my 2 sons, who were toddlers at the time. The guy who lived next door was about 60 years old and worked for the cable company. He had always given me some very creepy vibes. Around this time, we were upgrading our internet, and another guy who worked for the same cable company came out to do the install. If I thought my neighbor was creepy, he had nothing on this guy. I was in and out while he was there that day, but every time we were in the same room, he would stare at me with this strange look on his face for a really, really long amount of time. The next day was Saturday, and my creepy neighbor must have been having a little get-together or something. To my dismay, the creep who had done our install was at the party as well. It was clear that they had been drinking all day and were getting louder and more obnoxious as the day wore on. A little bit after 8 p.m., both my mom and my brother left, leaving me there alone with my 2 young sons. Around 8:30, there was a sudden knock on my door. There stood that creepy installation guy. The man was very clearly drunk and told me he had forgotten to have my mom sign some document the previous day. I told him, no problem, I'll just sign it now. He started to take a step to enter my apartment. I positioned myself so he couldn't get through the door. Again, I said I'd just sign whatever he needed right now. He pointed toward the kitchen and said he had given my mom the document and it was now in our house. He pushed the door and tried to shove me out of the way and aggressively tried to step inside my apartment. This time, I made a more forceful block of his attempt. At that point, he turned his head to his left and said something to someone. I moved just enough to see who he was talking to. It was my creepy neighbor, who was standing with his back up against the wall of my apartment, so he was just out of my line of sight. I quickly stepped back in and shut and locked my door immediately. I saw the both of them start to walk away. I knew then that the situation was super shady, but I didn't know just how shady until I was telling my family what happened. Why would this guy need a signature on a document he left with my mom? Why would he come at 8:30 at night when he had been drinking all day? Why did they wait until just moments after everybody else left, something they would have definitely seen? And why was my neighbor standing where I couldn't see him? I'm glad that my creep radar was on full alert that night, because it really scares me to think what might have happened if I had just let him walk into my apartment. Here's my story. As a military brat who grew up in Japan while attending school on a US military installation, I graduated in the early 2000s. Following graduation, most of my graduating class moved back to the US to pursue college or start their adult lives. Most would leave and never return to Japan. My parent is Japanese though, so I had every reason to return. It was December and I had just returned home to Japan after my fall semester at college. Much to my relief, it seemed a couple of my friends had chosen to remain in Japan after high school. I had friends to hang out with while home on vacation. One evening, I was out joyriding with my buddies. We had nowhere particularly important to be, just driving around aimlessly. Occasionally, we'd stop by popular hangouts for young adults, hoping to meet some cute Japanese girls to flirt with. I mean, how else would a couple of young 19-year-old dudes want to spend an evening anyway? My friend, who I'll call Jay, had a 90s Nissan Silvia, and he was obsessed with drifting. Truth be told, he was not particularly good at it. You really couldn't fault the guy for trying, though. That evening, he suggested we take off to Asamizo Park near our hometown of Sagamihara. This large public park had many parking lots peppered throughout its grounds. There were lots of prime locations for him to practice whipping his car around back and forth, while not causing damage or fender benders. Without hesitation, we all agreed and headed in that direction. About 20 minutes later, we're passing the main entrance to Asamizo. During the day, this is a pleasant public park with many recreational activities going on. Japan, in comparison to other countries, is a very safe country. This park was no exception to that notion. However, it did have some unfortunate events happen there. After driving into the park for about 7 minutes, we reached the first parking lot. It was around 10 o'clock at night. We pulled in and parked. I hopped out of the car and pulled out a fresh pack of cigarettes and lit one up. The evening was brisk. I gazed around, letting my night vision calibrate as the lights far off in the distance twinkled. My other friend with us, R, also lit a cigarette, and we proceeded to have a conversation about whether Jay would even be able to get his car sideways. Jay pulled out and began to whip his car around the lot. As he spun counterclockwise, the wailing of his tires attempting to grip the asphalt broke the silence in the evening. Even now, I can still close my eyes and remember that smell of burning rubber. Adjacent to the parking lot, there was a tree line that led into some thick brush and wooded area. The park was known for its green belts scattered through it. I remember looking over my shoulder a few times that evening because I kept getting this feeling we were being watched from out in the woods. Each time I scanned the tree line, though, I wouldn't see anything out of the ordinary. What happened next would cause me to jump so hard that I laugh even now when thinking about it. The cell phone in my right pocket suddenly started ringing and vibrating. I jumped up with fright. The fact that light paranoia had set in from watching the tree lines did not help with the anxiety experienced from this unexpected phone call. As I was attending college in the States and only back on vacation, I no longer had a cell phone in Japan. In fact, my younger sister had lent her phone to me so that I could be reached if necessary. I pulled out my phone, thinking it must be her or my mother, calling for something. None of my friends even had this number. As I looked down at the green backlit LCD screen, though, I saw displayed in Japanese a restricted number. I thought that was strange, but figured maybe my sister was just calling from a public phone. Yes, those were still a thing back then. I answered the phone. Moshi moshi. There was nothing but silence for a response. I remembered hearing a bit of static. Then I finally began to hear the voice of a Japanese girl. My immediate thoughts, of course, were that this must be a friend of my sister, so I explained that I was her brother and just borrowing her phone for that evening. If she needed to get a hold of my sister, she should bring the house instead. The girl apologized, and I reassured her that no harm had been done and promptly ended the call. I placed the cell phone back in my pocket and focused on the ruckus of noise coming from Jay's car. Not 10 minutes later, though, the cell phone in my pocket began to ring again. This time, I was sure it had to be my sister or mother. Earlier that day, I left home and didn't say where I was going or when I planned on coming home. It wasn't uncommon for my mother or sister to call and ask if I had eaten dinner yet or if they should leave food out for when I would be returning. I pulled the phone out once again. I had a phone call. A restricted number once more. I answered the phone. The same voice of that Japanese girl was on the other end. Before I could ask why she was calling for my sister, she cut me off. Based on the previous phone call, I thought there were a couple of funny things going on here. I know most of my sister's friends and recognized their voice over the phone as well. This girl, on the other hand, didn't sound familiar at all. Additionally, my sister never mentioned anything about new friends, and her circle was very tight. She wasn't very big on being a social butterfly, you see. Perhaps I was wrong, though. My sister was 3 years junior to me after all, so my assumption was this girl had to be around my sister's age and way too young for me. I had very little interest in engaging in conversation. The girl started to probe me with questions, and I kept my answers vague. I don't know why I continued to entertain a conversation with her. but a hang-up I supposed might just be very rude. Suddenly though, she asked me what me and my friends were doing out in the park so late in the evening. I almost began to answer when it dawned on me. I did not mention anything about where I was or what we were doing. I had never told her I was at a park. The girl giggled and tried to play it off, insisting she thought I said I was there. I told her this was too weird, and then I hung up. Jay had grown tired of drifting in this lot. He pulled up to us, and from the driver's side suggested we change up the scenery. R and I hopped back in the vehicle and off we went. Now at another parking lot we hopped out, and Jay continued to do his thing. This lot had soccer fields not too far off from it, and the lamps in the lot painted an orange hue, which was kind of oddly comforting. Strangely enough though, that feeling of being watched soon returned to me. I swung around to my right and stared at the empty field on the other side of the parking lot fence. There was nothing there though. At this point, Jay parked his car and shut it off. Now silence and a thin film of burnt rubber veiled the parking lot. R started asking what was up with all those phone calls, and I began to explain what happened. They both agreed it was a little bit strange, but speculated maybe my sister had mentioned to her friends that her older brother was back in town. Jay proceeded to tease me that I should start talking to this chick, but I protested because I had no interest in someone that age. Suddenly, my phone rings again. Same restricted phone number. This time, the girl was much more aggressive. "How come you guys left? What was wrong with that last spot?" I asked what she meant. She then told me, "You guys left the last parking lot you were at." I remember the hairs standing up on the back of my neck immediately. I made it a point to be vague, but somehow this girl knew what I was doing, that we had left, and where we were now. Something was not right here. I hung up immediately. A moment later, my phone was blowing up. I answered again, this time very irate. "What the fuck do you want from me?" There was silence, and then I heard a bit of light static. In a sort of hushed whisper, I heard her voice. "I'm at the field. I see you." I spun around and faced the field looking for any sign of a person. I remember my heart racing as I fumbled to figure out what exactly was going on here. "What do you mean? What do you mean you see me at the field?" She told me she could see me standing with my friends, wearing my gray jacket next to my buddy's car. She told me she was coming over to us, and that all she wanted was to hang out. The line went dead. I looked at J and R and gave them the rundown. They both had weird looks on their faces. I knew them well enough to know when they were lying or pulling my leg, but they looked clueless. My phone rang again. "Hey, I'm almost there. Will you wait for me?" "Huh? No, what the hell is going on here? Why do you keep asking me these questions? How do you know where I'm at? Just who are you anyway? I know all my sister's friends, and I don't recognize your voice." "I never said I knew your sister." At this point, I was like, what the fuck? I looked back at the field and couldn't see anyone. As I was still on the phone, I asked where she was at. She just kept saying she would be there shortly. I'm sure my friend sensed the panic in my voice. Jay went on and on about how nobody knows we're out here. How did this chick seem to have our location the entire time? Mind you, this was 2000. Social media, internet 2.0, and smartphones were not a thing yet. People couldn't just get your location like that. On top of that, we were many kilometers out of the way. You don't just randomly run into people out here. The evening was getting later. It was past 11 p.m., and I had no explanation as to what was going on. My phone rang again. Before I could even answer hello, she asked if I could see her. I was spinning, jerking like a laundry machine agitator at this point. Ari yanked the phone from my hand and proceeded to speak to her as well. Feeling like this was a joke, he decided to toy with her a bit. He started to ask her what she was wearing. She began explaining something to him, from what I could hear from how he responded. He asked her what color her undergarments were, and then she abruptly hung up. He thought he had annoyed her enough that she may not bother calling again. We all nervously chuckled as we couldn't even begin to understand what had just transpired. My phone started to blow up again though. Same deal, restricted number. I answered again, this time upset, but I was cut off immediately. Her voice was much louder now. I could hear what sounded like wind in the background. She began saying she was approaching us, yelling not to leave. She wanted to be with us. All of a sudden, I could hear Jay drop a soda can as he faced the field. "What the fuck is that?" I remember Jay saying in disbelief. I hung the phone up. I looked at both my friends and Jay motioned to jump in the car. We all jumped in, and he stomped on the gas as we made our escape. My phone rang again. I looked. Although I didn't want to answer, I felt as though I needed to. I took the call and I could hear her voice, this time slightly huskier. "It's such a shame that you all left before I could reach you." Jay was now frantically driving away from the park. All that time, I had no idea where he was taking us. It was quiet in the car as I held the phone up to my ear. "I guess I'll just need to follow you. Maybe I'll find you at the Family Mart you're going to stop at." She gave a creepy laugh. "What the hell do you mean by the Family Mart we're going to?" Before I realized it, Jay cut the wheel hard and pulled to the side of the road. He threw on his four-way hazard lights and brought the car to a sudden stop. R damn near hit the dashboard, sitting in the shotgun seat. Jay turned and looked at me. I still remember the paleness of his face. He called into the phone. "How did you know I was taking us to Family Mart?" I hung up the phone and powered it off. We sat in silence for a moment. This felt like a weird dream or something. I told Jay, "Let's get out of here. We need to go somewhere else." Shortly after, we drove to a 24-hour restaurant that was our hangout spot, where many of our Japanese friends frequented. We just wanted somewhere brightly lit and somewhat crowded to chill out at. As we walked up to the entrance, I could see some friends occupying a booth. We walked in and proceeded to join the party. After we ordered some coffee, we started explaining the strange occurrences of that night. Initially, everyone looked on with excitement, but as I explained the story more, the look of excitement written on everyone's face eventually faded, and it got awfully quiet. Another female friend of mine who sat across from me, I'll call her A-chan, looked at me and asked again the whereabouts in the park we were at. As she asked me this, I could see her make eye contact with her boyfriend H. He pulled out a cigarette and lit it as he went into his explanation. "Well, you guys, you all know what happened at Azamizo Park, right?" We all exchanged a blank glance. There was an incident that happened in that park one evening. A girl was walking through the park. Someone approached her and dragged her into the greenbelt, where she was raped and strangled. I heard some rumors about some bad juju associated with the area or something. In disbelief, I scoffed. "You can't be serious, right?" Without any hesitation, he looked me dead in the eye. "Nope, I'm not joking, but you need to go to a shrine. Maybe her spirit latched onto you or something." Now, I don't know if it was really a ghost or what all that was, but I do know it was one of the scariest fucking things that ever happened to me in my life.